What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danelle Hallan, and I am back with another true crime video. And I do want to say something before I get into this case. I have mainly been MIA the past week and a half, 2 weeks, because of all the flooding that's been happening. You guys know I was very vocal when Western North Carolina experienced the catastrophic floods just last year, like almost to a year now from Hurricane Helene. I was part of the disaster relief afterwards. I unfortunately firsthand saw the horrific things that these people went through and everything that they lost. And for some reason, despite doing that, it still did not click in my head that this can happen to anyone. And I'm usually one that prides myself on trying to remember that. And it got really real this week when it hit my home. Thankfully, I'm fine, but not everyone in my community is. And obviously, if you've been paying any attention, Texas is definitely not okay. And there's also been flooding in Vermont and New Mexico. And it has just been something straight out of my nightmares the past week. Even with all that I saw in Western North Carolina, there was something different about it happening right here in my home. There was something different about having to, in the middle of the night, figure out if there's even a way out of my area without having to cross over a big river. Counting how many rivers I would have to cross to get to my dad, whose backyard is the river. It was terrifying. And I just wanted to kind of talk about this because it was really scary not being prepared for something like that, even though we've seen what these kinds of floods can do. And so I just want to encourage you guys, just take a minute to plan and talk to your family and just be safe, be aware, because it was a big reality check for me this week. And I never want anyone to feel that in the middle of the night, realizing something horrific might happen and you are not prepared for it. So to help me sleep better at night, I just really, really want you guys to have these conversations with your family, and not just about flooding, but like all natural disasters. This world seems just so chaotic lately, and I want everyone possible to be safe. This has been so devastating to watch. So many people have been lost. I drove right by them pulling someone out of the river the other day down the road from me. It has just been traumatizing. And so I think we all need to take a minute and focus a little bit on ourselves and our family and our safety and just being prepared in emergency situations. And I say this because we are the true crime community and we prepare for like everything else, and we know how to be safe and how important it is. And this has just been something that's rocked my world the past year, and I want it to resonate with you guys like as much as I possibly can get it to. I hope you guys are safe. I hope none of you came into harm's way or dealt with any of this flooding over the past 2 weeks. So now with mom Danielle out of the way, trying to take care of my little true crime children, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into today's case. And today's case is a really, really rough one. This emotionally sent me on a ride, and I could not imagine being anyone directly involved in this case because just lately the theme of my videos has ended up being betrayal, and it's nothing that's been planned, but that just keeps happening. And this one in particular is a betrayal like I cannot fathom. Today, we are going to be talking about the heartbreaking case of Anjelica Hadsell, an 18-year-old college student that came home for spring break. She was excited to be in her first year of college, had a whole future ahead of her, and she never got to return back to campus. She was the kind of person that wouldn't just vanish. She had afternoon plans that day with her sister. It looked like she was in the middle of chores, like she had been interrupted, and then she was gone. And it ended up taking weeks, a massive community search effort, and a twist that no one was prepared for to finally uncover what really happened. Because sometimes the answers aren't hiding in the shadows. Unfortunately, they're standing directly beside you the entire time. So let's go ahead and get right into the details. Anjelica Hadsell, who was better known by her family and friends as AJ, was born on August 9th, 1996. And from a young age, she always stood out, and not in this like flashy or attention-seeking kind of way. She just radiated this energy and warmth, and I feel like you can even see it in every single photo of her as a child. She was incredibly fearless growing up. Her first stepfather, who was, in my opinion, her true father, has shared so many memories of them going out biking and hiking and how she would just take on these massive challenges like it was nothing. She was also incredibly affectionate, and she was deeply grounded in the people around her. Now, AJ's biological father was not involved in her life from the get go, so it was just her mother, Jennifer, that was raising her. And when she was about a year and a half old, her mom ended up marrying Zach Hoffer, the man that I was just talking about. And from that point, even though he was technically her stepfather, he was her dad in every single way that mattered. AJ didn't know he wasn't her biological father, from what I can gather, until she was about 10 years old. And so Zach Hoffer was the man that raised her, who showed up for her, who built a life with her. He has said publicly that AJ was his first daughter, quote, blood or not. The two of them had an incredibly close bond. They were always outside together, climbing trees, going on hikes, finding little adventures. Zach really seemed to nurture AJ's love for animals and her appreciation for the outdoors. And they moved around like all kinds of places. They were always in different states, experiencing different things. Now, when Jennifer and Zach ended up having two daughters together, AJ's younger sisters, AJ immediately stepped into a nurturing, caring role. She was so excited to be a big sister. And she wasn't just like a big sister, she almost took on this role of being a second mom. She loved to help clean up and match socks and play games. She would often organize little skits and cheer routines with her siblings. She was just the kind of person that made everyone feel included and looked after. She was always finding fun things to do, exciting things to do, putting a smile on everyone's face around her. Now, eventually, Jennifer and Zach ended up separating, and it was understandably really hard on AJ. Zach had been her dad since she was a toddler. That was all that she had known, and that bond isn't going to just go away. And so when they separated, Zach still had 50-50 custody of all of them, including AJ. And he even got permission at this point from AJ's biological father to adopt her. Unfortunately, that adoption never went through, but he still remained a steady presence in her life. He viewed her just as he did his two biological children. And then Wesley Hadel entered the picture. Jennifer and Wesley ended up getting married about a month after they met, and everyone's lives in that family changed very rapidly. Jennifer and Wesley had their own child together, and eventually Wesley decided to adopt AJ. And at the time, it seemed like AJ was adjusting well. She even called Wesley dad now. It doesn't seem like she was as close to Zach any longer, and her last name had originally been Hoffer. And so now it was like a complete change up, but her relationship with Wesley seemed good. It appeared stable. He was present, involved, and very outwardly supportive of her. And during this period, the entire family was living in Norfolk, Virginia. And AJ was thriving. She had a stable home environment, she had a full set of responsibilities, and she remained really committed to her family. And she was consistently finding ways to support those around her. She volunteered a lot, she had really good group of friends, and even when times were tough, which they often were, AJ was just the kind of person that handled it all with grace. And she didn't have things easy all the time. She suffered from migraines. She was prescribed, I believe it's called nortriptyline hydrochloride, and she used that under guidance of a neurologist because of how bad her migraines were. Like, she had a lot of things she was battling through in life, but despite all of these challenges, she refused to let anything slow her down. She had so much she wanted to accomplish in her future. And during high school, AJ just continued to excel. She wasn't just a strong student, but she was also a top performer. She was actively engaged in her school community. And by the time she graduated, she even earned the title of valedictorian, which obviously reflects her incredible work ethic and determination. And not only was she academically successful, she also was really, really awesome at sports. She was competitive in the best way possible. Everyone described AJ as kind of being a shy person until she was in her element, and then she exuded this confidence that was unmatched. She played softball, she loved playing field hockey, and she approached all of her games and practices with the exact same energy that she dedicated to her studies. And so sports provided her with just this other opportunity to grow and challenge herself, collaborate with others. And by 2015, at just 17 years old, she became a freshman at Longwood University, which she got to on a scholarship, by the way, because of all of her hard work. And true to her character, like absolute AJ fashion, she dove in head first. She was majoring in both technology and computer programming, so a pretty challenging double major. And not only that, she's like, how can I add another layer of challenge onto this? She said, I'm going to graduate in 3 years. AJ was so ambitious. She had so many goals for her future, but obviously, her first year wasn't without its challenges. She did face difficulties, including academic pressures of college. It was a lot harder than I think she expected it to be. She was also having to adjust to life away from home. She was navigating her relationship with her boyfriend, Joshua Campbell. And while some sources said that her and her boyfriend might have been considering a breakup at the time, others indicated that they were still very much together when AJ ended up returning for spring break and vanished. She was excited to come home for spring break to get this break away from her studies and from some of the chaos of school, feel like she was getting back to her roots. But unfortunately, things at home also weren't exactly stable. Just a few days before AJ returned, Jennifer had made the difficult decision to kick Wesley out of the house. Apparently, Wesley had been struggling with drugs for a while, and it doesn't seem like a sudden issue either. And it seems that at this point, the situation had escalated to where Jennifer felt she had no choice. And it seems that the drug of choice was cocaine. And so she's like, you know what? You got to get out of here. You can't have this around our children. We cannot do this anymore. And so Wesley ended up moving into a nearby hotel. So yet again, AJ seemingly lost this father figure in her life. And so she was understandably upset. She said that she felt like Wesley was choosing drugs over his family, over her. And that really hurt. Addiction is a hell of a thing to go through for everybody involved. And it added just another emotional weight to everything that she'd already been dealing with. But AJ, like I've said in her typical way, wasn't letting it show too much. She was still planning to enjoy her break, trying to reset. I think she knew she really needed this break from school, and she wasn't going to let anything bring this down for her. And so on Friday, February 27th, 2015, AJ was picked up from Longwood University by her mom and her two sisters to begin her spring break back at home in Norfolk, Virginia. And her schedule for the whole week was already packed. That first weekend back at home, she spent time shopping with her family and her close friend Andre Barr that she had gone to high school with. She also had an orthopedic appointment scheduled for the following Tuesday, March 3rd. I guess she had some sort of lingering injury from a car accident. And after that, she planned to go to the gym with one of her sisters. Wednesday the 4th, she was planning on seeing her boyfriend Josh Campbell. So like there was so much going on. And from the outside, it seemed like a normal week. She had things she wanted to do, people she wanted to see. And unfortunately, this brings us to the day that AJ disappeared. Monday, March 2nd, 2015. So after that first weekend, AJ was home early that morning while her mom went off to work and both of her sisters headed to school. And she wasn't planning on just kind of lounging around that day. She had chores to do, she had errands she potentially wanted to run, and she'd also made plans to get smoothies with one of her sisters once school let out. Now, fast forward to later that afternoon, AJ's sister ended up arriving home around 2:30 p.m., expecting to head out for smoothies with her like they had planned. But when she got home, AJ wasn't there. And not only was AJ not at the house, but the entire house just felt off. The front door was unlocked, which was very unusual. The family dog had also been left outside unattended. Clothing was half folded in the living room. AJ's Bluetooth speaker was still on. Her wallet was sitting on the couch, and her winter jacket, something that she definitely would need to take had she gone out in the cold, and the truck that had been left there in case AJ needed to go out was still sitting in the driveway. So it seemed like AJ had just, in the middle of doing something, walked out of the house, either on foot or got into the car with someone else, and she was gone. And so her sister started to look through the house and realized that AJ's phone was gone as well. And she wasn't responding to text messages or calls. And there were also a few items of clothing that seemed to be gone, as well as only one of her black Vans sneakers. And these were the shoes that she typically had when heading out. So now, not only did she leave the house without her jacket mid chores, but also without one of her shoes. But then things got really weird when AJ's sister went to the kitchen table and found that there was a pink sticky note written in AJ's handwriting. And all it said was, quote, "Dear Madre, with everything that's going on, it's a lot to deal with." Now, right away, she informed her mom something was going on. AJ wasn't at the house. Everyone was trying to get in touch with her. And the note itself just felt so off to everyone that knew AJ. It was definitely in her handwriting, so she did write it, but the tone wasn't matching. She was never really a vague person or cryptic like that. And it seemed like really open ended with everything that's going on. It's a lot to deal with. But like there was no, so I'm going to take a few days to myself. It just felt like a really bizarre thing for anyone to say, let alone AJ. She also wasn't one to flake on plans without letting people know. She usually didn't even go anywhere without letting someone know, whether that be friends or family. But no one had any idea where AJ was. That entire afternoon, her family continued to try calling and texting her, but they got nothing back. And for someone that communicated really well, this silence and the strange note, the way the house was, all of it was setting off alarm bells. But they kept hoping that maybe she would eventually come home. Maybe she got caught up in some other plans. I mean, at this point, she's technically an adult. She can do what she wants. She's 18 years old. But by the next day, March 3rd, when no one still had heard from AJ, she hadn't come home. Jennifer at this point decided to report her as missing. Now, from what I've been able to gather from police reports, officers didn't come to the house right away. It wasn't until the following day, Wednesday, March 4th, that they finally came by to speak with the family. So at this point, AJ had already been gone for almost 48 hours. AJ's mom and sisters informed the police that the last time they saw her was at 7 a.m. that Monday morning of March 2nd. And initially, Wesley corroborated this timeline. And he showed up, I think, sometime around lunchtime after authorities were already there. And they did note that the way he showed up was a little bit strange. He was kind of like disheveled and dirty and twitchy. He seemed incredibly exhausted. But at this point, they just attributed all of that to the fact that he had just been kicked out of the house for drug use. A lot of it seemed pretty on par for someone that was on drugs. So they figured that was why he showed up the way that he did. Just like AJ's mom and sisters had said, Wesley claimed that he also last saw AJ at around 7 a.m. that morning. Apparently, just as Jennifer was pulling out of the house, Wesley called her and was like, hey, I need to swap cars because he had his personal truck with him at the time. He worked HVAC, and so he had a work van that he still kept at Jennifer's house. So she said, yep, stop on by. Just put the keys for the truck in the mailbox in case AJ wants to go anywhere. And so it seems like he maybe saw her that morning or saw evidence that she was moving around the house. However, he ended up later changing his story, claiming he actually last saw her around noon. And so this means that Wesley was potentially one of the last people to see her. Wesley ended up claiming that AJ had reached out to him that day while he was working and she seemed upset or like in some sort of state of distress. And so he met her at a gas station that was really close to his job to make sure she was okay. And she ended up asking him for $100. And at this point, despite her kind of off text messages, he said that while at the gas station, she seemed fine. She didn't seem super stressed out or upset. She never said what the money was for, but he figured maybe she wants to go shopping. Like, I guess there was nothing that indicated he should be worried at this point. So it seems he gave her the money and he went about his day. And thankfully, he was able to tell authorities the last thing that he saw her wearing, which was leggings, a pair of boots, and a college jacket that had her name embroidered on it. Wesley was also able to even further the timeline, saying that he believed she made it home safe and sound after they met at the gas station. He told police that they had a security system in place at the home, and he had received notification from that system at around 1:30 p.m. And so he assumed that that meant AJ had returned home safe and sound because neither of the kids were off school yet. Jennifer was still working, so AJ would pretty much be the only one that would have triggered the security system. So at this point, authorities are like, okay, well, if there's a security system in the house, like, did it go off again? Did you get any more notifications? Like, did she just leave? Did someone else come in? They had all these questions. They wanted to see the notification he got from 1:30. They wanted to see the system logs, but Wesley told them that unfortunately they couldn't. He claimed that his phone had recently been factory reset, and he also said that for whatever reason, on the exact same day AJ vanished, he decided to cancel the security service. So, I mean, it would have had to have been in those few hours after AJ went missing that he canceled it. So authorities are thinking, okay, that's a little bit sketchy, but there had been nothing else so far that really made them feel strange. And Wesley seemed super dedicated to finding AJ. He even was telling officers that day that he was already conducting his own investigation, that he was sending people out to find things. But when authorities tried to ask him for more details, because that can be a bit of a slippery slope when it comes to potentially hindering an investigation, He refused to explain what he meant or what exactly he was doing, but it seemed pretty obvious that he was putting in solid effort to try and find her. And so at this point, everyone jumped in to try to locate AJ. AJ's family, her friends, the Norfolk community all rallied together. They were putting up flyers and sharing posts. Everyone remained hopeful that there was going to be a positive outcome. Now, Wesley ended up becoming particularly involved. He kind of spearheaded this investigation and fight for answers because AJ's mom was a much more private person. I can only imagine how challenging it would be being in the situation to talk to investigators, to talk to the public, for the media to be there. That's a lot of pressure, and you're already going through so many things. And so he kind of stepped up and took that lead role. So he was active on social media, he was communicating with these news outlets. He also was the main one to coordinate a lot of these different search efforts that didn't directly always involve the police. He was consistently posting updates and encouraged people to join the search for AJ. He wanted as many people out there as possible to find her. Now, one thing that was a little bit strange and alarming that made a lot of people wonder if she was potentially abducted or with some bad people is that some of AJ's family members recalled receiving some strange texts from her the day she disappeared. I guess she had informed either her mom or her dad, or possibly both. It's not really clear that she was with friends, but she wouldn't be specific about any of it. Again, like that note she left, she was being very vague. She wouldn't say who these friends were or where she was with them before she went silent. And all of her known friends, her core group of people, none of them had seen her. And not just that, but the language in all these text messages, it was not like AJ at all. It felt really off, like it was potentially not even her sending the text messages. And unfortunately, that's a pretty big indicator that someone else is trying their damnedest to make people close to her believe that she's okay, when in reality, it could be the opposite. And so at this point, no one knew what to think because while this was strange, the note didn't seem like her, the text didn't seem like her, none of this behavior seemed like her. There weren't any obvious signs of foul play either. And the scene of the house was definitely strange, but it also didn't immediately suggest something bad had occurred, more like she got interrupted. Authorities at this point were also even considering the possibility that maybe AJ was feeling overwhelmed, whether it was due to school because all of the things that were going on, her relationship because of the potential breakup, or maybe the recent turmoil at home with Wesley being asked to leave. She did have a lot of things going on that can break a lot of people. And so people were worried maybe she went off and ended her own life, or maybe she ran away to escape it all. But deep down, everyone that knew AJ knew it had to be something more than this. She would not just abandon her plans. She wouldn't ignore her family. Even if she was going through something horrific and just needed a break, she would have reached out to one of her friends. She was not one to leave anyone in the dark. Something was wrong, and they were determined to find out what happened. And it didn't take long at all for breadcrumbs to start popping up. You're thinking, you know what? Finally, good. Really early on, there's information in the case that can lead to answers. But when I tell you that instead, these breadcrumbs led to the most chaotic, convoluted, nonstop merry-go-round that you will have ever been on in your life. That's no joke. Just 3 days after AJ was reported missing, when everyone was still on the ground trying to search for her, there was a sudden development that shocked everyone, but everyone hoped would bring answers. On Thursday, March 5th, AJ's friend, Corey French, was walking home in Norfolk when he noticed something strange on the sidewalk. There was just like this little piece of something that caught his eye for whatever reason. And when he approached it, it was a piece of a broken debit card. And so he picked it up and looked at it, and AJ's name was on it. Now, this discovery immediately changed the tone of the investigation because the card wasn't found far from Corey's house. He actually lived very close to AJ, and it was one of the main roads that AJ would have had to be on to get in and out of the neighborhood. I actually think there was only one way in and out. And Corey walked this route every single day to and from work, so it wasn't like he necessarily randomly stumbled upon it per se, but it was a little bit strange that someone close to her just so happened to see what most people would consider a piece of trash on the ground, pick it up, and it just so happened to belong to a missing person. So police immediately took this piece of the card and started to search around the area further. There obviously had to be the rest of the card somewhere, but all of the searches that they did, they never found any more pieces. And questions started to form about how her card ended up there. Her wallet had been left behind at the house on the couch, which already I thought was strange in and of itself since she allegedly met Wesley for $100. If she needed that for something, if she was planning on using that money to run off, like it potentially could have seemed, why would she have left her wallet with her cash in it sitting on the couch, only leaving with her card? And especially if it's someone that doesn't want to be traced, that's probably going to be the last thing you're going to take. And also the question of, did she walk off on foot and just accidentally dropped it? Or had it been tossed out of a car window to get rid of any sort of identifying factors? And probably most of all, was it just a coincidence that someone that she knew was the one to randomly stumble upon it? Someone that lived very close by and may have known that she was home alone at the time. And not just that, someone that had a interesting history with AJ. At this point, police brought Corey in to question him more extensively, and he explained to them that he and AJ had a pretty long history. They actually briefly dated in middle school, but at that point they were just friends and they hadn't seen each other in months, but they had maintained connection of some sort majority of their childhood into her going off to college. And he admitted to authorities that he had reached out to her when he saw she came back for spring break to try and see her. He had sent her several calls, several texts, but he claimed that no plans had ever been made. It seemed like he was being pretty cooperative. He was answering every single question, and so authorities didn't really have anything solid to fully believe he was potentially involved in whatever happened to AJ. But a lot of the facts were just seeming really weird at this point. He had called her several times to see her. It hadn't worked out, so maybe he took matters into his own hands. Maybe he just showed up, and maybe those feelings that he had for her all those years before, he wanted to act on again, and something went wrong. So at this point, they wanted to keep a very close eye on Corey while also still exploring every other potential angle. But what happened just the following day had authorities turn their sights even more on Corey. So, the day after that debit card was discovered, yet another pretty significant development came to light. And once again, it came from someone that was really close to her. AJ's friend Andre Barr, that she had gone shopping with just that weekend, showed up to the police department that afternoon claiming that he had found something significant, and he seemed really visibly disturbed by it. He said that he had visited Corey French's house, that same Corey that had just found the debit card, and while he was there, he said he ended up stumbling across something he never would have expected to find. Behind one of the cushions at Corey French's house on his couch was a jacket. And not just any jacket, but AJ's college jacket that had her name embroidered on it. This was not the kind of item you just mistake for someone else's, okay? Pretty clear as day who it belongs to. Andre told authorities that he immediately recognized it and knew it belonged to her. And he said that it was hidden just enough that it would have been easy to miss, but he thankfully had spotted it while hanging out with Corey. And so this revelation made police that much more uneasy. It was also the exact same jacket that AJ was last seen wearing by Wesley before she vanished. So why on earth was it now inside of Corey's home? And why hadn't Corey brought it up earlier? When he was first questioned, he had claimed that he hadn't seen AJ in months, but now all of a sudden, he allegedly has possession of the jacket she was last known to be in. Andre told authorities that he had just left it there, he didn't want to touch it, so right away, authorities jumped to action. They very quickly obtained a warrant to search Corey's home, and sure enough, they ended up finding the jacket exactly where Andre said it would be, tucked behind that couch cushion. And so with all of this sketchy information combined, they were like, you know what? We've got to bring Corey back in because his story is not lining up. I mean, there's now physical evidence linking AJ to his home. And once again, Corey seemed like dumbfounded that they would even ask him these questions, and he denied knowing anything. He continued to insist that he had not seen AJ since she came home. And when police confronted him with the actual jacket that they found in his house, his reaction was intense, and authorities weren't really quite sure how to take it. Corey visibly jumped back, seeing the jacket. He cursed, he looked genuinely shocked. It was like Corey had just seen a ghost. And immediately he said the very cliche thing so many people love to say. He had no idea how that jacket could have ended up in his house. But no matter how much police pushed him harder, questioning his timeline, Corey continued to maintain his innocence, and authorities were sitting there and thinking, all of this seems really, obvious that he is potentially involved. But at this point, there still wasn't enough to arrest Corey for anything. They had searched the house. There was no other sign of AJ at all in the home. And so they had no choice but to release him. And with Corey now very dead center of the spotlight, the atmosphere around the investigation shifted again. Even though Corey insisted that he had absolutely nothing to do with AJ's disappearance, obviously, none of what happened could be ignored. And so, for many people close to AJ, the damage was already done and their minds were made up about Corey. And that includes Wesley. Like others, he too started to zero in on Corey, and he made it very publicly known. He was so upset that there were all these strange things connected to Corey when it came to AJ's disappearance, and it seemed like police were doing nothing about it. And there were a lot of people publicly that supported him just absolutely going after Corey. To be fair, this kind of thing is not unheard of. Families often feel forced to take matters into their own hands when they feel the system isn't moving fast enough, when they feel there's someone, potentially living down the street from them that is involved in their daughter's disappearance. So things became really, really heated. And Wesley began to confront Corey head on. He stood across the street from Corey's house. He was blasting an air horn. At one point, he even sent a pizza to Corey's house and wrote a message on the box that said something along the lines of, "I know what you did." And Wesley ended up going to the police several times, urging them to take a harder look at Corey. And he said there was good reason for them to do that. Not only was he kind of centered around the only pieces of evidence found of AJ outside of her own home, but he also said that Corey had this history of being obsessed with AJ, that he remembered it back to when AJ was in middle school. And he insisted that it had always been there, it had never gone away. But authorities at this point were still trying to rule everyone out. They wanted to go through every possibility, which meant every single person close to AJ had to be looked into. And another person that was very much so on authorities' radar was someone else from AJ's past. Her former stepfather, Zach Hoffer. Now, as I've already stated, Zach had been incredibly active in AJ's life. He raised her for half her life, and he had expressed a desire to adopt her. And he played this significant role in AJ's life up until the point Wesley Hadel entered the scene and ended up adopting AJ instead. And so that particular detail made authorities a little concerned. Zach previously wanting to adopt AJ, but not being able to. And then all of a sudden, Wesley comes into the picture and immediately adopts her. Authorities wondered if it was possible Zach was upset, whether he might be feeling lingering resentment or hurt. And while it had been years at this point, unfortunately, when you have someone that goes missing or is a victim of violent crime, statistically, it is more often someone close to them, a father figure, a family member, just someone like that. And so they had no choice but to look into this possibility. And so they ended up bringing Zach in, who had, just like everyone else in AJ's life, been front and center trying to find her. He also had been putting out flyers and doing searches. He was helping as much as he could to try and figure out where she went. But when they first started to question him, he also was raising red flags. According to authorities, he was overly interested in the investigation. And obviously, if you have a missing loved one, you're going to be interested. You're going to want to know things. But there's also this fine line where anything beyond that, it's like you're trying to figure out how much they know to protect yourself. That's a thing that happens, unfortunately, very regularly. And so authorities were a little sketched out by him, but ultimately, Zach had a solid alibi. So there's no evidence at all to suggest that he was involved in her disappearance. Just kind of like everyone else so far, this underlying strange vibe that made authorities unable to rule out anyone at this point. It was like every person that they came to acted just weird enough to be on their radar, but they could never find anything further than that. It really did feel at this point like everyone could be a potential suspect, everyone close to AJ.
Also tonight, 4 weeks and still no trace of missing teenager Anjelica Hadsell.
But friends and family are not giving up hope, and tonight another show of support and prayers that she will be found. For nearly a month now, police and loved ones of Anjelica Hadsell have been asking, where did she go?
Friends and family have searched. Police have been called to a field in Chesapeake, but no big breakthroughs.
More than 100 people out here tonight. You can see many of them are still on the field right now as they just released balloons. First off, tell me, how are you holding up?
I'm okay right now.
And then tonight, the balloons, 100 people or so are here. What does this mean to you and your family and the friends that have been by you all this time?
It shows that there's a lot of support. Everybody has her in their prayers, and everybody's got hope and praying for her to come home every day.
And then we were talking on our 5 o'clock news earlier from an interview we did previously about how you guys are still strongly under the impression that AJ is out there, that she's alive. Are you still under that impression?
Yes, definitely.
And then what do you want people to know about Anjelica that are at home right now that, a month later?
Just, there's a lot of support out here for her, and I hope to continue to see more support as, the days go, however long that may be, hopefully not too much longer. She's a great kid, and we just want her home.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And this is Andre, friend Andre, very close to the search. And Andre, just tell us, what does releasing balloons mean for you guys today?
It's a sign to AJ to let her know we're still looking and that we are going to find her.
But then on March 20th, a third major discovery was made, and this one changed everything. Wesley Hadel ended up reaching out to AJ's friend, Andre Barb. And again, just to remind you who that is, that was who she went shopping with. That's who went to Corey's house and saw that AJ's jacket was hidden behind a couch cushion. Wesley ended up telling Andre that he had just received an anonymous tip about AJ's belongings. And like you see in many different investigations, the family was also trying to take in as many tips as they could. And oftentimes the family will get tips that the police don't because people aren't comfortable going to the police with information. And so Wesley was checking up on every single one of these tips that he was getting from the public. And so, according to Wesley, this person anonymously called him and mentioned that AJ's clothing would be found near Battlefield Boulevard in Chesapeake. And so, this almost seemed like someone who was involved with the case called to lead someone to a piece of evidence. Like this was some sick game or something. And so, Andre and another friend immediately agreed to go with Wesley to investigate. And so, they drove out to this area in Chesapeake. And as they were driving around, Wesley all of a sudden pointed out to the side of the road and pulled over quickly, saying that he saw the clothing this person was talking about. And so Andre and his friend immediately jumped out of the car, and they couldn't find anything like immediately. So they had to search through the nearby brush, and they ended up discovering several of AJ's belongings, things that undeniably belonged to her: her softball shorts, a knee brace, and the other black Van sneaker. Now, initially, this might have seemed just like another stroke of luck, which seems like how every piece of evidence at this point kind of fell into everyone's lap. However, just like with the jacket, authorities were like, you know what? Corey was involved in the debit card. He also was involved in the jacket, but just as strangely, now Andre was involved with the jacket and also finds more pieces of her clothing. And so now authorities are thinking, are we going to have to add another suspicious person to our list of people that may be involved? Because what are the odds of Andre's repeated involvement? So pretty much tit for tat, the exact situation that was happening with Corey. I'm telling you, if I were on this police department trying to investigate this, my head would be spinning from the way this evidence was being found. And not just that, like authorities weren't finding anything at this point. It was all efforts from people around AJ, which knew her most and could make sense. But authorities are like, how are they all finding these things? And we're getting none of these tips. Like, we're not finding anything. And so this time, investigators decided to bring Andre in for questioning because they wanted to know, what are the chances that you found the jacket and now you're also the one to find all of AJ's clothing? Like, you were close to her. You saw her since she came home. They wanted him to explain himself. Like, please give us someone we can rule out. Like, make this make sense. But after they brought Andre in and he was confronted with all this suspicious behavior authorities were seeing, he ended up cracking. He had a lot to share. And while I think authorities knew something felt so off about this case, I don't know if they were prepared for what Andre ended up telling them. So Andre ended up admitting to police that he had been very hands-on and involved with Wesley's own separate investigation into finding AJ. He very regularly was contacted by him. They went out and searched for a lot of things together. I mean, it was like an everyday effort between the two of them to try and figure out ways to find AJ and narrow things down and what can we do next. But the call that he received from Wesley the day that he ended up later finding the jacket was not exactly what he was expecting. So apparently Wesley ended up calling him that day and was like, hey, I need you to come over and meet with me. And when he got there, it was him and Wesley and Wesley's neighbor, who was, drum roll, an off-duty Norfolk police officer. And Wesley ended up admitting to Andre and this off-duty officer that he had broken into Corey's home, I think the night before. And so they're listening to him like, why on earth would you break into this kid's home? And so Wesley ended up defending himself and saying, I broke in because I so strongly feel Corey is involved. He said he was searching for AJ. He thought there was a huge chance AJ could be held hostage there. He also said that he was trying to find any signs of evidence that she may have been there at any point that day. He believed authorities were doing nothing to look into Corey further when he found the debit card, so he took matters into his own hands, something that he had been doing from the very get-go. And he said it was at that point when he broke into Corey's house that he ended up stumbling across the jacket. But at that point, he said that he was in a pretty big predicament. He kind of realized in that moment that there's no way he would be able to turn that jacket over to the police because he would expose a break-in that he had gone into Corey's house illegally to find this jacket, which not only would get him in trouble, but could also make that jacket inadmissible in evidence. And so he frantically tried to put together a plan of how to make sure this jacket could be found naturally. So that is why he called that meeting with Andre and the off-duty police officer that day. Wesley asked Andre to find a way to be invited over to Corey's house. And seeing as they were all friends, that shouldn't be very difficult. And he ended up providing very specific directions on where to find the jacket. He said that he himself had found it hidden behind a couch cushion, and he wanted Andre to just so happen to see it as well, but not to touch it. Again, he wanted it to be used as evidence in a further trial, possibly. Just a few hours, Andre ended up getting an invitation over to Corey's house. And so he went over there and kind of like meandered around. And sure enough, to his horror, Wesley was right. That jacket was right behind that couch cushion. And so immediately he left Corey's house. And who was he picked up by? That off-duty police officer. The off-duty police officer took him to the police department so he could report this discovery. Andre told police at this point that he participated in this and he agreed to pretend to find this evidence. I'm sure because it probably felt like the right thing at the time, like he felt like this had to be found to get answers, but also because Wesley had apparently pressured him, even threatening to, quote, take care of anyone who contradicted this version of events. And at the time, it made sense why he wanted someone else to pretend to be the one to find it. But then Andre started slowly putting dots together that made this whole situation seem that much more off. Andre admitted to authorities that Wesley had pointed directly to Corey as a suspect from the very beginning. Like the moment AJ went missing, Wesley was immediately saying Corey was the one behind it, based off of nothing but what he, I guess, considered his gut or intuition as her adoptive father. And so Wesley ended up telling multiple people that were friends with AJ to keep an eye on Corey because he felt like he would slip up at some point. He would either have evidence or do something weird or go where he had taken AJ or potentially give away some sort of information. And so he wanted everyone to spy on him. And all of AJ's friends were doing it because Wesley was so adamant that Corey was involved. And Wesley really drove it home by telling all these friends that, Corey had been obsessed with AJ and he was the only one that would have been nearby when she went missing. All of these different things. And within days of Wesley pointing the finger at Corey, all of a sudden the debit card is found by Corey on his walk to work. And all of a sudden the jacket is at his house. But at this point, I don't think Andre could figure out, is this happening because Wesley is right? Or is this some sort of setup happening? And so it was only at this point that investigators began to fully piece together the depth of Wesley's manipulation. Up until now, many had seen him as a determined father that was desperate for answers, but this was no longer just a grieving parent looking in the dark. It felt like something else. When authorities really sat back and looked at the entire timeline of things, all of Wesley's behavior, they felt like Wesley was hiding something. So investigators began revisiting every single part of the investigation. The timeline, Wesley's statements, the surveillance footage, the places that he had searched, the stories that no longer added up. The focus was finally turning toward the one person who had worked so hard to steer it away from himself. And so the exact same day that that clothing was found, the exact same day that they questioned Andre, investigators decided to bring Wesley Hadel in for questioning because they wanted to know how he had come across the tip that led to the discovery of the clothing. Because at this point, Corey and Andre weren't the only ones finding things several times in a row, but Wesley had been as well. And authorities had found it a little strange that this whole time so far, it seemed like Wesley had been the one getting the most tips, which again does happen. Families do encourage tips, but he was getting a pretty extreme amount of them. He always seemed to be the one to have more information than police. He was always at the perfect place at the right time. And so they're like, okay, then you need to prove that you got this tip. Let's legitimize it so we know that there's someone else out there that led you to these clothes and you didn't just know the perfect place to search for them. Wesley went on to tell authorities that he had received a call from a blocked number at 5:02 p.m. on March 19th. So the day before he went out with Andre and this other person to find these clothes. And this person allegedly directly told him where to look for the clothing. And so investigators, similar to the security system situation, asked Wesley if they could see the call log. They're like, hey, we want to see when this person called you. We want to confirm this. We want to see if there's any way to trace this number. But also, like the security system, conveniently, Wesley said that he no longer had record of that phone call, that he had deleted everything on his phone and his call log to free up his phone memory. So he had no way to prove that this call was legitimate. Spoiler alert, they already had all of Wesley's phone records. There was never a call by a blocked number made to him the day before at the time that he claimed. Authorities at this point decided to start confronting Wesley with additional evidence they had collected that painted him in a very bizarre light. Just days before this, on March 17th, Wesley had apparently organized one of his big public searches, and this was specifically for AJ's missing phone. And very similar to how the clothing was found, he claimed that he had received a tip from someone that said that the phone would be somewhere in this field. And so he told authorities that he was going there to search. He wanted to make them aware, and they offered to come out there. So police ended up arriving and immediately were taken back because news crews were already on scene. It was like someone had already called them to be there to document everything. But that wasn't the only thing that was very weird to them. As the volunteers all fanned out to search the area, Wesley made a beeline for a very specific 10 by 10 patch of tall grass, and he seemed to be frantically searching only that specific spot. And ultimately, no phone was ever found during that search. But authorities could not shake how strange a lot of those details were, especially when just a few days after that search, a man ended up coming forward to police saying that he had found AJ's phone like 2 weeks before this. This person claimed that they had lost their phone, and so while they were looking for their phone, they inadvertently ended up finding AJ's phone. And they didn't know it belonged to a missing person. They just figured someone else had lost their phone, so they kept it safe. And once they ended up connecting the dots, they brought this phone forward to authorities. And so authorities are asking this person, where did you find this phone? And ironically, it ended up being found exactly in that field that they had been searching that day. More specifically, it seems like it was found in that 10 by 10 patch of grass that Wesley was obsessing over during the search. So authorities had AJ's phone for a couple of days at this point, and that gave them easier access to look into things, look into all the phone records, figure out GPS movements, pings, things along those lines, and it had uncovered some damning information, which probably made them happy that they had a reason to bring Wesley in that day of the 20th after finding the clothes. Records indicated that both Wesley's phone and AJ's phone were located near Wesley's hotel on the afternoon of March 2nd, which would have been after she disappeared, and into March 3rd. They wanted to know how on earth Wesley would be able to explain that. Why was her phone moving in tandem with his in the days after she disappeared? How did he know where to look for her phone? Why wasn't he able to prove someone called him with information about where the phone would be? And so they confronted Wesley with this information, and right away, he denied everything. And he basically said he had no explanation to give, and he couldn't explain why all these weird things were happening, and that they were just focusing too much on the wrong thing. However, when investigators stepped out of the room, leaving him alone, and he was still being recorded, Wesley very quietly said to himself, I'm screwed. The inconsistencies in Wesley's story were starting to pile up, and I think that they were trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I can't imagine how conflicting it would feel as an investigator to think strange of someone involved really close to the case, while that same person seems to so actively be trying to get answers. And that's a lot of the reason why people do that, because it makes people think, well, if they're trying so hard, there's no way they're involved. But at this point, investigators were no longer ignoring all of these strange things. That same day, investigators obtained search warrants for both Wesley's work van, the one that he'd been driving the day that AJ disappeared, along with the hotel room where he had been staying. And what they ended up discovering just added a whole other chilling new layer to the investigation. In Wesley's hotel room, they located 2 guns and ammunition in a vent in the ceiling, like very specifically hidden. And he was not supposed to have weapons of any kind. He was a convicted felon, which we will get into in a little bit. And so that already was going to be a charge for him. And they also found a bag of heroin and cocaine that were hidden. Also in his hotel room, we're able to find his laptop and we're able to get into all of those electronics. And interestingly, they were able to find that just days before Wesley claimed to get this tip about the phone and its potential location, he was already Googling maps about that area. And so, how would he have known to look at maps of that area if he didn't receive the tips until days afterward? At this point, they also decided to bring in a cadaver dog to his hotel room just in case, and to everyone's horror, it ended up alerting to a spot on the carpet beside the bed. But apart from that, they couldn't find any other signs of AJ. It didn't seem, I don't think that there were signs of a struggle anywhere. But what they found in his van was even more alarming. Investigators ended up finding a shovel, gloves, and duct tape, and he did work in HVAC, so those are all things you would potentially need for working in that job, but all of them were covered in dirt, and there was a huge chance that they could have been used for concealing or disposing of a body. Also ended up finding a hair tie and a photo of AJ, which again, could be normal. Maybe she rode with him at some point in his work van. Most fathers keep a picture of their daughter or their loved ones on them. Like, that's not necessarily weird, but again, in the context of things, they started to be worried, especially because it seemed like for whatever reason, Wesley had been spending a lot of time in that van lately. He had essentially been living out of it despite having that hotel room. He had clothing in there, toiletries, discarded fast food wrappers scattered throughout, and it was beyond just someone that works all day out of their van. He had been in there for quite some time. But probably the most significant discovery came from, again, like last video, a Garmin GPS tracking device that Wesley's employer actually had installed in his work van. Because if you know anything about HVAC work, people usually have their own vans. They travel frequently to different job sites and different homes. And so GPS is kind of essential for navigation with a job like that. And so authorities decided to look into this Garmin GPS device. They wanted to see what Wesley's movements were like on March 2nd when AJ went missing, on March 3rd, all these times he was known to be working and using the van. And interestingly, on that 2nd and 3rd, when he would have been working, when he would have needed to use that device, there was almost no digital data recorded on it, which was highly suspicious. But the GPS log did show lots of activity on March 4th, which would have been 2 days after AJ went missing, and the same day that authorities came to the house to talk to her family to figure out what could potentially be going on. When they looked into the route of the van that day, Wesley's van had been traveling around a lot. It seemed, again, pretty typical of his activity on a day where he's working. However, his van ended up traveling to a pretty remote area in southern Southampton County, which was over an hour away from where he lived. The van made multiple stops in this area at different gas stations. It was looping around rural roads that seemed to lead to nowhere. And then finally, at 11:52 a.m. on the 4th, the van pulled into the driveway of what authorities found out was an abandoned home on Smiths Ferry Road, which is right on the North Carolina border. And I'm trying to pretend this is not 2 hours away from me right now. 2 hours is too close. He then pulled his van to the back of the property and remained there until 12:14. Immediately after leaving this house was when Wesley headed back to Jennifer's home and met with investigators, dirty, tired, and visibly disheveled, claiming to have been out searching for AJ and working. And so it seems like their gut from the get-go that he showed up strange the very first time police spoke to him had been right all along. This GPS data potentially could change everything, but without knowing exactly what they'd find there, they had to continue to move carefully. So for now, they just decided to act on what they could prove. So the day after his interview on March 21st, investigators ended up arresting Wesley, but not for anything related to AJ, instead for breaking into Corey's home, and I think also for those weapons charges because he wasn't supposed to have guns. And they found them stashed in his motel room. And I think they knew, based on Wesley's involvement in the case and what he was doing, that he very likely, if he was involved in things, would try to dispose of evidence or do something to pin this on someone else. So they wanted him arrested and unable to touch a single other thing related to AJ's disappearance. And that was a smart move to make because they ended up finding out that the day they arrested him, like just hours before, Wesley had returned to that abandoned home on Smith's Ferry Road. So it seemed like he knew they were tiptoeing close to some sort of answers.
The Norfolk man whose daughter vanished 3 weeks ago will stay locked up, but not for the disappearance itself. Wesley Hadel was appointed a public defender in court this morning. He's facing 6 felony charges, and this is video of his conversation with Joe Fisher from jail over the weekend. He fully admitted to breaking into a house to do his own detective work.
We see forensics fans out doing things, but we don't get calls. We don't get notified. So why should I share with the police department something that they in turn won't share with me? It's our daughter missing, not their daughter.
You can say with confidence that you have nothing to do with the disappearance of Anjelica.
Yes, sir. I can say with 100% confidence that I told him last night, I don't know where she is. I don't know if anything happened to her or did not happen to her.
While AJ's mother is hoping to turn the focus back on the search for her missing daughter. AJ has been missing since March 2nd. Mrs. Hadsell says there's many pieces of information that have come about, but no clues or leads have led authorities to her daughter, and she says her husband's arrest over the weekend is a very big distraction.
All of that stuff does right now, in my opinion, is irrelevant until she is found, and then everything else can get handled. It does not matter to me right now. It doesn't. I'm not even thinking about that. I am trying to focus on AJ, and that is priority number 1 and my only priority right now.
It wasn't until April 9th, 2015 that investigators officially searched that abandoned property on Smith's Ferry Road. And I've not seen any explanation why it took a few weeks for them to get out there, but what they did find was heartbreaking. This abandoned house was in the middle of nowhere. And in the very back of this lot, there was a small building. And investigators were kind of walking the whole property and noticed that beside that small building was a ditch, and over the ditch was a piece of plywood. And when they lifted the board, they found AJ. Unmistakably, it was AJ. She was face down in the mud, still wearing the same clothes that she had on the day that she vanished. And based on the way her pants were on her body, it seemed possible that she had been SA'd. There was duct tape also found near her body, which was interesting considering what was found in the back of Wesley's van. She had blunt force injuries to her head, to her upper body. She had horrible bruises all the way from her chest up to her chin, what they described as control injuries. So someone holding her down with their knee or something similar to her chest, potentially trying to strangle her. She had 2 black eyes. AJ had suffered through hell before her death. The level of decomposition made it difficult for the medical examiner to determine the exact cause of death. But when they did, the 2 different possibilities that they found that were documented, one of them took everyone back. Obviously, I'm sure you're expecting that one of them was blunt force trauma. The other was signs of potential heroin poisoning. The heroin levels in AJ's body were 3 times the fatal amount. 3. And based on toxicology from a hair sample that they had taken, she wasn't like just an active user of heroin. According to her friends and family, she had never used heroin in her life. It seems like this was a one-time extreme dosing of heroin. But unfortunately, they weren't able to tell which one of those was the one that ultimately ended her life because of the level of decomposition and the complexities of the way that her remains were found. It doesn't seem they were ever really able to fully determine cause or manner of death. But regardless, she had very obviously experienced extreme violence. She had suffered through strangulation on top of all of that, potential SA. But they unfortunately, also due to decomposition, were not able to definitively determine if that was involved or not. This discovery confirmed the worst fears of AJ's loved ones. Her family, her friends, her community, all of them had held on to so much hope this entire time. And even as the days dragged on, even when her silence was deafening for them, they didn't lose hope that they would find her, that she would be okay out there somewhere. And now the truth was unbearable. Not only did she suffer such a brutal and horrific death, the man that had been leading the search efforts for her, crying to cameras, begging for her to come home, was possibly behind it.
I was sad. I cried my eyes out like a baby. And it just doesn't seem right, you know. Angelica's an awesome kid.
That's how Zach Hoffer says he reacted when police announced they found human remains earlier this morning on this property in Southampton County. It happened while police were searching the area for AJ Hadsell. Later this afternoon, Hoffer was out here talking with investigators. He says he was once married to AJ's mom and helped raise AJ until she was 13.
I don't call her my daughter so much anymore because we've been estranged, but she is my daughter. I raised her and I love her.
As authorities began going over every single statement and timeline again, they just continued to uncover more inconsistencies in what Wesley said. They did decide to look into what he had claimed and his movements from that entire day. And so they were able to find surveillance footage from a 7-Eleven that's located just around the corner from AJ's home. So again, there was only one way in and out of the neighborhood. Anyone that wanted to go to this house would have had to pass by the cameras from this gas station. And sure enough, they were able to confirm that his truck was seen driving into the neighborhood at 7:01 a.m. He swapped cars, and just a few minutes later, I think at 7:07 or something along there, his work van was seen leaving. And so this corroborated what he said, what Jennifer said, and it's not likely he saw AJ during this time. So then they moved on to the next period of time where he claimed he last saw her, which would have been at noon that day. If you remember, Wesley had told authorities that he met AJ around noon on his lunch break at a gas station close to his job, which was across town. But when authorities looked at this particular gas station that he claimed to have met her, and I mean, they even took a still shot and had him circle the exact spot where they both parked and talked to each other, they looked through everything hours before, hours after, the time he claimed to be there. Wesley and AJ never were at this gas station. And so they continued to look into that surveillance at 7-Eleven near AJ's house. And at 12:16 p.m., all of a sudden, Wesley's work van is seen passing by, heading the direction of AJ's home. And then at 1:27 p.m., so over an hour later, surveillance captured Wesley's van driving away from AJ's home. So around the same time, he claimed that the surveillance system sent him an alert that he believed meant AJ had gotten home from across town safely. It was all a load of absolute crap, what he had been telling authorities this entire time. So it was making sense now why he could never prove any of it, and conveniently said that he had just accidentally deleted something or canceled something. He was lying. At this point, investigators speculated that Wesley went to the house knowing that AJ would be alone, the exact same thing he had been accusing Corey of doing this entire time. And they believe that he may have instructed her to write that vague note that was later found after he ultimately abducted her, which is why the note sounded so open-ended and off. It was nothing that she would personally write. He was probably just pulling something out of his ass to try to make people believe that she had gone off on her own, which to me has a lot of intent behind it. It seems like he knew AJ was never going to be coming back to that house after she left with him. And just 30 minutes after he likely left with AJ, her sister returned to the house thinking she was going to get a smoothie with her, and instead found it in the strange state she did. Like AJ had been in the middle of doing something when she was interrupted, and she had been interrupted by Wesley. Authorities continued to ask around to piece together this puzzle, and they ended up going to Wesley's coworkers. And they told investigators that Wesley had been acting completely normal that morning until just before 11:45 a.m. when he claimed he received a text from AJ that visibly upset him. So again, kind of along the lines of what he told authorities. He told his coworkers that AJ's text message to him was, quote, worrying, and that he needed to go home and check on her. So Wesley ended up taking his lunch hour early to go and check on AJ, but he ended up failing to return to work on time. So his supervisor had actually been calling and texting him with no response. And when he finally returned back to work at 2 p.m., he appeared distressed to his coworkers. He explained that he had met AJ at a gas station and she had asked him for $1,300 or $1,500, which he said was more than she typically would. And so he was worried she was planning something or something was off, and he was upset about it. But what's interesting about this is that he gave his coworkers a huge amount that he claimed AJ allegedly asked him for, but he had told authorities the day after she was reported missing that she'd only asked him for $100. But regardless of these discrepancies, his supervisor and coworkers said that when he came back to work, he was so shaken and upset that they actually let him leave work early that day. So shortly after 2, Wesley had the rest of the day off. So authorities continue to try to piece together his movements. Now, according to phone records, at around 2:45 p.m., just after getting off of work, Wesley immediately started calling his drug dealer, a man named Damon Harriet. And not just one time, but Wesley called and texted this man 40 times, which is really interesting considering AJ was believed to have died from an overdose of heroin, which was also one of the drugs found in Wesley's hotel room. And in the midst of all these frantic calls to this drug dealer, there were also these strange texts that were being sent to both, I guess, Wesley and AJ's mom that didn't sound like her typical language that she used, what I spoke about earlier. And it was likely because AJ's phone was traveling with Wesley's at this point, and it was likely him that was sending the text. Just another attempt, like that note, to delay anyone from thinking anything was wrong. Now, I'm not sure what happened in the next few hours, but just after midnight, going into March 3rd, Wesley was captured again on surveillance at an ATM where he was acting incredibly paranoid. He kept looking behind him, checking to see if anyone was watching him, and he withdrew a crapload of cash. And just hours later, according to evidence and witness testimony from the drug dealer himself, Wesley ended up purchasing $800 worth of cocaine and heroin. And I'd be very interested to know how much heroin he purchased specifically and how much they found left at his hotel, but I have not been able to find that anywhere. So at this point, there was clear evidence that Wesley had been at the home while AJ was alone, that he possessed the same drugs that had gone on to poison her, to overdose her, end her life, that he had lied both to the police and his employer the day that she went missing. And additionally, several people were interviewed by authorities that revealed what appeared to be a pretty significant cover-up that began immediately. Investigators were able to discover that before Wesley broke into Corey's house, when all of a sudden her jacket was found, Joshua, AJ's boyfriend, had been there as well. And I guess along with Andre Barr, Joshua was another person that was really working closely with Wesley to try and find AJ. And because Wesley from the get-go was pointing the finger at Corey, Joshua decided to take things into his own hands. So again, before Wesley even broke into Corey's home, Joshua ended up going there. And while Corey was in the shower, Joshua used this time to scout the entire house for any signs of AJ's belongings. And interestingly, he never found anything, which it's possible that he just didn't locate the jacket, or maybe the jacket just wasn't there yet. And so that night, after Joshua had scouted out all of Corey's house, Wesley actually ended up calling Joshua to ask him about the layout of Corey's home, inquiring about if there were security cameras on the property. And during that same call, he confessed to Joshua that he was actually standing outside of Corey's house, contemplating going inside to look for evidence himself. And miraculously, after Wesley made this trip into Corey's home, that jacket suddenly appeared. This situation just increasingly suggested that Wesley had been attempting to plant evidence and frame Corey from the beginning. It became even more suspicious when on March 6th, Wesley organized yet another search with AJ's friends. And during all of this, they ended up finding several additional pieces of her debit card, you guys. And remember that authorities, the same day Corey found a piece of this card, had searched the entire area and there was nothing there. But now all of a sudden, here's Wesley again. And as he's searching the area, multiple pieces are found, it's starting to sound like Wesley had this card and was like, you know what? If I'm going to pin this on Corey, let's put something right in the middle of his walk to work that he's going to find that authorities will think is suspicious. And maybe that's why he got so angry when authorities didn't put as much weight into Corey finding this card. But there was still more. The situation escalated on March 8th. Andre ended up telling authorities that he and AJ's cousin ended up being invited to Wesley's hotel room. And while they were there, Wesley showed them his 2 guns and ammunition that authorities later found hidden in the ceiling vent. And Andre claimed that during this meeting, Wesley was just kind of popping off, okay? He was claiming to them that he was a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. He encouraged Andre to look him up online to show them how scary he was. Andre apparently did look up Wesley online on Google and quickly found that he had a long criminal history, including charges for kidnapping and robbery, which again, I will get deeper into his criminal history in a little bit. Wesley went on to tell Andre and AJ's cousin that he had plans to, quote, get rid of Corey. And around the same time, authorities found that he had actually reached out to a friend to rent a truck for him. And he claimed that he needed it to help search for AJ, but he said he just didn't want it under his name to prevent a paper trail from tying it back to him. And while that's definitely weird, the friend, I guess, didn't think much of it at the time, so they agreed. And ultimately, the rental never ended up happening. Not sure why it fell through, but regardless, that same friend later went to Jennifer and was like, yeah, Wesley tried to get me to rent a truck for him. And that was kind of, I think, one of the first red flags for her that something was off because he already owned a truck. Why would he need another truck? And why would he need it in someone else's name when it came to investigating into AJ's disappearance? Just days after that, on March 12th, Wesley ended up visiting a neighbor's house to inquire about AJ's missing cell phone. He ended up admitting to the neighbor and this neighbor's daughter that he had broken into 14 homes on his quest to find answers about AJ. And he said that he sprayed all of them with luminol, quote, looking for a crime scene. He also confessed to them that he had broken into Corey's home and found evidence that he, quote, could not discuss. And he also claimed that he had surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera showing AJ being followed home after meeting him that day by a white car. However, he explained to them that he hadn't turned it over to police because, quote, they were struggling enough. It really seems like he went and spoke to anyone and everyone that he could, planting these seeds, giving them these ideas, claiming he had done things and had evidence and all of these things to continue to push this narrative that he really wanted everyone to believe. Andre also told authorities that while driving with Wesley and that other friend to go and look for AJ's clothing after Wesley received that alleged tip, he really started to find things odd then because Wesley was driving erratically along this road where the clothing allegedly was when all of a sudden he screamed that he saw clothing on the side of the road and whipped over. And you would think since he was the one to see the clothes, he knows where they are, he would jump out of the car and run to this clothing that he spotted. But instead, he told Andre and this other person to go and locate the items and gave them no answer as to where he saw them. And when they went and looked for them, they were not even obviously right there directly on the side of the road. They had to actually search. So he's like, how did he see this clothing while driving erratically? And we had to get out on foot and allegedly the exact area they were and search for it. It seemed like he purposefully wanted Andre and this other friend to be the one to find it. And so piece by piece, a pattern was emerging, one that painted Wesley Hadel as not a grieving father, but someone trying to control the narrative, eliminate threats, and cover his tracks. And so the buildup to what ultimately happened was not just suspicious, it was deliberate. This had been a plan that had rolled on for weeks at this point. And honestly makes me wonder if this had been in the works for quite some time. Investigators knew at this point they were closing in. Despite having a lot of strong circumstantial evidence in this case, it ended up taking years before Wesley Hadel even was arrested for the murder of AJ and before he went to trial for the murder of AJ. And I think one thing that just really complicated the situation was the undetermined cause and manner of death. And there was speculation there, but that's just not always enough. And so authorities wanted to make sure that their case was airtight. They would need every single piece of evidence possible to be compelling. That that would be such a huge place for the defense to take a blow. And if they manage to unravel the cause and manner of death of AJ, that throws everything into question, and you're never going to get a conviction out of that. And in the years before there were ever any formal charges against Wesley for the murder of AJ, lots of information just continued to come out, specifically from AJ's former stepfather, Zach Hoffer. Now, he has his own website. If you're interested, I encourage you guys to go and look at it. He's got a ton of information on there, a ton of different court documents, all of these things. And he publicly expressed his devastation, obviously, and heartbreak that occurred, this lengthy road to justice. He was so upset. Zach Hoffer had tirelessly worked to keep AJ safe. And the story that he began to tell the public made me so upset and should make everybody upset. When he and Jennifer split, he had 50-50 custody of AJ. And again, I don't think at this point she knew this was not her biological father, but by every definition of the word, Zach was AJ's dad. And it wasn't until Wesley Hadel came into the picture that he started being pushed out. And so he took it upon himself to look into Wesley and saw that Wesley had a very disturbing past. And it was upon learning this information that he decided to pursue full custody of AJ. He got the permission to adopt her from her biological father. I mean, he was going as hard as he could to put her in safe hands. When Zach looked up Wesley's background, he discovered a criminal history that was extensive and violent, beginning in his teenage years with arrests for things like theft, assault, drug-related offenses, and felonious restraint. But probably the most alarming incident occurred in 2005 involving Wesley's estranged wife. It seems there were some issues within this marriage, and it led to Wesley allegedly essaying and trying to strangle his wife. And so after this incident occurred, she filed a protective order and pressed charges against him, and that is documented. But allegedly, when Wesley learned that she was trying to press charges against him, he went bananas. He ended up finding her and abducting her. He reportedly forced his estranged wife into his car and then spent the next almost 2 weeks trying to evade arrest. And this quickly escalated into a multi-state manhunt. People were trying to find him. There was also allegedly a $50,000 reward out for his estranged wife, trying to locate her safely. And ultimately, the search ended only after he was located and led police on a high-speed chase in Illinois, which ultimately ended in a crash. And I believe his estranged wife was found. She was taken. She was put into safe hands. But Wesley hid in a cornfield all night before finally being apprehended. And during this entire time, he allegedly committed several robberies to fund his flight, and he also spent the entire time repeatedly essaying his estranged wife. And so this led to multiple charges against him. Wesley ended up being indicted on charges involving SA. Again, I hate that I have to say that, but they will absolutely take my videos down if I say anything different. Kidnapping, assault, domestic violence. However, he also had pending federal charges in regards to a bank robbery. And I don't know if that happened before he abducted his estranged wife or during, but regardless, those federal charges ended up trumping the other charges. And so they delayed that trial from happening until, and I don't think you're ready to hear how long this was delayed, 2017, over a decade after he allegedly abducted his estranged wife. And I know that the federal bank robbery charges were well out of the way because just before he ended up meeting Jennifer, he had been released from prison for those charges. That's why he was a felon. That's why he was not allowed to have guns. Why on earth did they not go on to a trial? They did not try him for those until he was already suspected of kidnapping and murdering someone else. 2017, okay? This crime occurred in 2005, and AJ was murdered in 2015. So it sounds like they just kind of forgot about these charges until he came under serious scrutiny again, and then they proceeded with them. Now, unfortunately, given the fact it had been over a decade, evidence had been lost or mishandled. Many witnesses, detectives, officers involved in that original case against his estranged wife had died, or they were no longer able to testify for whatever reason. They were in poor health, but still, the remaining evidence that they had clearly implicated Wesley in the crime for all of these charges he was indicted on. But Wesley, as convenient of a man as he is, claimed that all that missing evidence and the witnesses they could no longer have take the stand would have proven his innocence, despite the fact that the witnesses that were able to take the stand very heavily pointed to his guilt. So, due to all of this, he was ultimately only found guilty of misdemeanor assault. For all of that, finally in 2018. This is crazy. And not only that, but he only was sentenced to 6 months in prison for it. So Zach had uncovered all of this information before AJ ever went missing, before Wesley ever adopted her, and he had tried to warn everyone he could. I guess he even spoke to AJ's mom about it, and she knew already that there were all of these charges, and he had this extensive criminal history. So that's why he fought so hard to get custody of AJ. He raised red flags in family court. He was trying to prevent Wesley from having a role in AJ's life. And I guess in those court proceedings, he tried to get anyone and everyone that could to come up and speak about Wesley and his history. But even Wesley's probation officer at the time refused to testify about his criminal past and the charges he had still not gone to trial for and was indicted on. All those delays and failures in prosecuting Wesley for those crimes from back in 2005 meant that he was able to remain free to insert himself into AJ's life, free to manipulate the system, and ultimately free to do irreversible harm. Zach had done everything in his power to protect AJ, but the system didn't listen and it didn't act enough, and ultimately she died because of it.
I wish that I could take her place all the time. I wish that.
It's been nearly 2 years since police found AJ Hadsell's body in Southampton County after weeks of searching. She died of a heroin overdose. Yet after all this time, there are still so many unanswered questions. Zach Hoffer is the man who helped raise AJ, her stepfather, before Wesley Hadel came in the picture.
It's been an emotional roller coaster, I guess you could say. I don't know. It's been horrible. It's like the worst thing that you can possibly imagine.
Police named Wesley Hadel, AJ's adoptive father, as a person of interest, but never a suspect in her disappearance. He's now serving 20 years in prison for unrelated gun charges, and still no one has been charged in AJ's death. Even though no charges were ever filed against Hadel, Hoffer believes more could have been done to protect AJ and his 2 other daughters. Hadel has a violent criminal history dating back to his teens.
This was common sense. Anybody who looks at this can say, wait a second, somebody somewhere should have been able to say something.
Meanwhile, Hoffer wants people to remember the daughter he helped raise in a positive light.
I just want her to have a good legacy. I want there to be justice for her, and I want her to, I want the truth about her life to be known.
He still believes justice is on the way.
The detectives are very competent, and they've put a lot of effort into this, and I just still have faith in them.
It is such a heartbreaking situation. It wasn't until 2018, 3 years after AJ's body was found, after he was finally convicted of at least assault in regard to this 2005 incident, that a grand jury finally indicted Wesley Hadel for first-degree murder in regard to AJ. Now, the first trial did not end up beginning until February of 2020, and for AJ's family, it had already been 5 years of waiting and uncertainty. But the trial ended in a mistrial, and the reason was actually Wesley's own statements that were recorded during jail phone calls hadn't been turned over to the defense in time. And that's so frustrating because they had so long, the prosecution did, to make sure they covered all their bases, and they unfortunately fell short, so the judge ruled that it was a violation of discovery, and so the trial came to a halt. And AJ's family was devastated. They had just waited so long to see the case brought to the court, and finally, as it's starting, it's just ripped away again. AJ's mom expressed her heartbreak publicly after this. She said that she felt like they were just reliving the pain all over again. They were still stuck in this limbo with no closure. Wesley's family, meanwhile, largely stayed out of the public spotlight, but Wesley himself maintained his innocence through all of this. He suggested, funnily enough, that he was being framed, which, like, I hate to laugh during these videos, but I'm like, are you joking right now? Like, you're gonna do what you did to Corey and then come to court and say, I'm being framed. And he tried to claim that everyone was just so focused on his prior criminal record that they wanted to pin him for this crime and they lacked evidence, which I'm like, listen, this is a pretty damning long list of evidence against him. Now, unfortunately, COVID came along and just delayed his trial further. And so the second trial wasn't scheduled until 2022. And this time, the prosecution, thankfully, came prepared. The delays had allowed them to refine their case even further and gather even more supporting evidence, and they leaned on all the things that I already talked about, like the timeline, the GPS data, the forensic findings, the manipulation that Wesley had orchestrated, the testimony from people like Andre Barr that felt like he had taken advantage of them and turned all of their attention toward Corey to get the spotlight off of him. I mean, the drug dealer even testified, Wesley's coworkers, AJ's own mother, and the testimony was incredibly powerful. It became so clear that Wesley had ensured each person was focused on anyone else but him. But even more importantly, AJ's loved ones were able to paint a very vivid picture of who she was. She was determined and loving and bright, and they showed just how much had been stolen from her. Wesley's bizarre behavior, his threats, his obsession with controlling the investigation were laid out for everyone to see. But on the other hand, Wesley's defense continued to argue hard. They said that the case against him was purely circumstantial and that there was no physical evidence directly linking him to AJ's death, which I kind of figured was going to happen when the cause and manner of death was labeled as undetermined. That would be the biggest thing they would go after. And essentially, they were trying to say, like, we don't know if the heroin killed her. What if she used heroin on her own and that killed her? They said none of this amounted to proof that he was involved in a murder. They also tried to pick apart the timeline, the chain of custody of the evidence, which irritates me because now that's just starting to seem like a tactic that Wesley turns to, because that's what he did in the 2005 incident. Once he finally went to court, it was all about like the evidence and it was lost and this can't be counted and it's too late and this is degraded. I'm like, I think he was leaning into something he knew had worked for him before and was trying it again. But thankfully, the jury was not convinced. They deliberated for just 40 minutes before returning a verdict guilty of first-degree murder. For AJ's family, it was a mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had finally come, but it had taken years and no outcome could ever bring AJ back. She was going to be gone forever. Nothing would fill that AJ-sized hole in their heart and their lives. Wesley Hadel ultimately was sentenced to life in prison. He would be given no parole. He would be given no second chances to go out and harm another woman, something he had a very clear pattern of doing. It was finally the end of a long and painful journey and the beginning of healing for everyone that AJ left behind. In the months that followed Wesley Hadsel's conviction, the shock of the trial's outcome started to give way to some sort of beam of light, some profound sense of purpose, because AJ wasn't going to fade away quietly. Her family wanted her death to mean something, what happened to her to mean something.
Some days when I don't feel like getting up, you don't have a choice.
Why would you do something like that to this family, to my best friend? A lot of people around this area, you just taking someone so important.
I don't know what I thought, but I never thought that it would come down to that.
In the weeks following the 18-year-old's death came a realization from Jennifer Hadsell in her darkest hours.
She would tell me to stop freaking crying. That's for sure.
Wiping away the tears, with it, a clearer vision for how to keep AJ's name front and center.
Anjelica Hadsell Memorial Scholarship Fund.
Through events like this golf tournament in September, loved ones and complete strangers are raising money for a college scholarship. It'll be awarded to a student athlete with good grades at Norview High School, a student just like AJ.
The scholarship has really helped heal all of us because it brings all of us together and just focuses our attention on something good instead of all the bad stuff that's happened.
The birth of the nonprofit has helped AJ's mom fill a void felt almost every day.
When you do family gatherings or birthdays, Christmas and all that kind of stuff, everybody, there's a piece missing.
So AJ's father, Zach Hoffer, launched a renewed push for legislation that would better protect children in custody battles, because blended family dynamics and custody battles in family court is a nightmare. Like, even just regular battles in family court are a nightmare. And I've unfortunately seen the system fail so many times, not just doing the work that I do, but in my own lifetime. And so he wanted to make sure things like this didn't happen again. So he advocated for things like stronger background check requirements in family court, for closing loopholes that allowed someone with Wesley's history to gain legal custody of a child. Zach wanted AJ's case to serve as a sobering wake-up call, okay, that the system has to do more to protect children from people with known histories of violence. And you would think that would be like obvious, but apparently it's just not. And this isn't the first time that I've talked about a case where something like this has happened. But I'm so happy that Zach is out there fighting to try and prevent this from happening to any other children. AJ's friends and her classmates all at the university also came together to honor her life. At Longwood University, the students organized a vigil in her memory that was beautiful. Professors and classmates all were able to come forward and share stories about her, her intelligence, her kindness. And the school also planted a tree on campus in her memory, which was just a symbol kind of the roots that she had started to grow before her life was cut short. I mean, she was just about to blossom in her life. She had worked so hard to get to that point and have that stripped away from her by someone that was supposed to be supporting her 100%. AJ's story continues to resonate with so many people. Her case has been covered all over because I think it highlights a lot of different aspects of true crime cases that we hope to not see, but are unfortunately prevalent. And that's people being so directly involved in the investigation, the search efforts, publicly speaking to the media. And the reality is that behind the scenes, they are doing that for such a sick purpose. And it's to make it seem like they're something that they're not. Like they're so caring, they never would harm that person. And it's so horrifying to see cases where this happens. Someone ended up telling the police that during one of the searches, when the news was speaking to Wesley, kind of their first red flag when it came to him was that when he was being interviewed in front of the camera, he was hysterically sobbing, crying, so upset about AJ being gone. And the moment the cameras turned off, he was laughing. It was like all of a sudden something turned off and all of it was for show. And I feel like it is so important to tell stories like this because with so many people interested in true crime lately and wanting to look into these cases and seeing what's happening on the news, and everyone wants to add in their 2 cents and their theory and who's involved and who is not. I think one of the most sobering realities you can come to in true crime is that sometimes the people out there screaming the most are the ones that are involved. And that was a very hard lesson for me to personally learn. AJ deserved to live a long and beautiful life. She was such a helpful, down to earth, mellow, sweet, kind individual that was just trying to make her way in this world, make something of herself. Her family has made it clear that she will never just be remembered for the way her life ended, but for the person that she was and the future that she deserved. On that note, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to AJ's story. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Hallan fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video.